She missed the interview that could have saved her whole family, but the person she stopped to help changed everything in a way nobody could have seen coming. Cleveland has a kind of cold that makes you feel small, like you're just one more shadow drifting through an endless gray rain. That's exactly how Delia Frost felt as she rushed along the slick sidewalk that morning, her worn-out bag slapping against her hip, her thrift store blazer soaked through to the shoulders, and her interview slip clenched in her fist like it held her entire future in its creases. And in a way, it did. 14 minutes. That's all she had left to reach the logistics building at the end of the block, where a warehouse manager job waited with the health insurance her 4-year-old son Toby desperately needed. Missing it wasn't an option, not after everything she'd given up for this one last chance. Delia was 27, her brown hair tied back in a hurry, her gray eyes ringed with shadows from nights spent stitching clothes till dawn, her hands rough from dishwater and sewing needles. She'd been up since 5, dropped Toby with the old woman down the hall, and borrowed every dollar just to catch this bus. But as she nearly ran past the corner, she saw her, a young woman with pale blonde hair crumpling beside a lamppost, her body trembling, her lips going white, while dozens of people hurried past like she was invisible. And in one frozen heartbeat, the building that promised her future on one side, a convulsing stranger who needed her on the other. Delia Frost had no idea the choice she was about to make would cost her the job, and pull her into a world she'd never dared imagine. A world ruled by the most powerful and coldest man in Cleveland. If this story touches your heart, hit that like button to keep us going. Don't forget to share it with someone who needs a little hope today. And subscribe to the channel so you never miss another real-life story that matters. For one moment, the world around Delia seemed to slow down. The car horns, the sound of shoes striking the sidewalk, the rain beating against the awning, all of it receding into a vague, humming blur, leaving only 2 images tearing at her mind. The glass doors of the logistics building at the end of the street, and the small body trembling in waves beside the lamppost. A voice rose inside her, cold and urgent. It sounded almost like her own voice on the nights she had stayed awake, counting every penny. Run, Delia. Don't stop. Your son needs you. This is the last chance. They already have someone else if you're late. Don't try to be a hero when you can't even take care of yourself. That voice made sense. Made sense in a cruel way, because Delia understood better than anyone that kindness was a luxury poor people were rarely allowed to possess. She had sacrificed too much for this morning. She had knelt down to borrow money from her elderly neighbor, had begged the old woman to watch Toby for a few more hours, had ironed her old suit again and again beneath the weak yellow light at 4 o'clock in the morning, until it looked as decent as it possibly could. And now only a few more steps, only a few more minutes, and she could walk into the room that would decide whether her son might finally be seen by a proper doctor, or still have to curl up in pain every time his illness returned. She glanced at the watch on her wrist, a cheap plastic watch with a scratched face, and the hands showed 9:51. Only 9 minutes left, and she knew that if she ran with everything she had, she could still make it, could still hold on to one fragile thread of hope. She looked toward the building, where warm light spilled from the glass doors as if beckoning to her, as if promising the future she had been dreaming about for months. Then she turned back to look at the girl again, and this time she truly looked, not a passing glance, but straight at her. The young girl had slipped away from the lamppost and fallen fully onto the soaked sidewalk, one cheek pressed into the cold puddle, her pale lips moving around words no one could hear, her curled fingers scraping weakly against the pavement, as if she were trying to cling to life. The crowd kept flowing past, a man in an expensive coat stepping around the girl as if avoiding a patch of mud, a young woman glancing over before hurriedly looking away. Everyone had somewhere to go. Everyone had a reason not to stop, and in that moment Delia realized this girl was invisible in exactly the same way Delia had been invisible her entire life. She thought of the times she had collapsed, and no one had reached out a hand, the times she had stood on the edge of the abyss while the whole world turned its face away, the nights she had held Toby through a raging fever in their cramped rented room and called one person after another, only to hear ring after hopeless ring. And then something inside her broke open, something stronger than the fear of poverty, stronger than the voice of reason screaming in her head. It was the instinct that had kept her awake for hundreds of nights because of her child, the instinct that would not allow her, to step over a life fading away, even if it meant losing her own future. Stop thinking, she told herself, her voice trembling even inside her mind. If you walk away now, what would that job even mean? How will you look Toby in the eye and teach him to live with decency when you turned your back on someone who was about to die? The interview appointment paper was still clenched in her hand, damp and crumpled. And with one decisive movement, Delia shoved it into her coat pocket. Almost hearing the door to her future closing in the rustle of that paper, she didn't allow herself to think for even one more second. Her feet, which had been aimed toward the building, suddenly turned back, and she rushed toward the girl, pushing past a passerby who stood staring in shock, then dropped to her knees on the wet, cold sidewalk without the slightest hesitation, her knees sinking into a puddle so icy it cut to the bone, though she barely felt it. She lifted the girl's head from the pavement, pressed her calloused palm to that freezing cheek, and called softly, "Hey, can you hear me? Open your eyes now, stay here with me." But the girl's eyes only opened to a cloudy slit before closing again, her small body continuing to shake with convulsions that made Delia's heart tighten, and in that very second, as her entire future slipped through her fingers, Delia had no idea that she had just touched the thread of fate that would pull her life in a direction she had never dared dream of. Delia's trembling hands moved quickly over the girl's face, and an old memory suddenly came alive inside her, painfully sharp. The memory of her mother's final months, when illness had made her suddenly collapse again and again with these very signs, pale skin covered in a layer of cold sweat, lips drained of all color, a body shaking beyond control, and eyes drifting away as if they were being carried toward some faraway place. Delia had once learned how to recognize that dangerous moment. She had fumbled many times in the middle of the night to mix sugar water and pour it into her mother's mouth, and now that sorrowful experience, the kind she wished she had never had, became the only thing that kept her from panicking. She pressed her hand to the girl's forehead, cold and damp, then bent close and put her ear near the girl's mouth, listening to the thin breath coming out in quick, fragile pulls, and in her mind one guess rang out almost with certainty. Blood sugar. This girl's blood sugar was dropping. Her body was running out of the last fuel it needed to stay alive. Without hesitating for another second, Delia reached for the small crossbody bag still caught on the girl's shoulder, her hands clumsy from the cold and from shaking as she pulled at the zipper, searched frantically inside, and among the scattered things, a tube of lipstick, a key ring, a few loose bills, she found two things that made her heart beat fast with hope: a small packet of fruit candy already torn open, and a palm-sized device with a screen blinking red numbers, a glucose monitor that Delia recognized immediately because her mother had once used a similar one. She glanced quickly at the screen, and the number displayed there was so low it sent a chill down her spine, and she understood that she didn't have much time left. With shaking hands, she tore the wrapper off a piece of candy, then gently lifted the girl's head onto her lap, used her finger to part those pale lips, and placed the candy inside the girl's cheek, whispering endlessly as she worked, "Suck on it, sweetheart, suck on it for me. Come on, you have to wake up, don't give up. I'm right here with you." She lightly stroked the girl's throat, coaxing her as if soothing a child, her eyes never leaving that face as she watched for the smallest change, and while one hand still held the girl's head, the other shakily pulled the phone from her coat pocket, the screen already streaked with rainwater, and dialed emergency services. Her voice broke with urgency when the dispatcher answered, "Please, there's a young girl unconscious on the sidewalk near the logistics building at the street corner. Her blood sugar has dropped. She's shaking, and her lips are turning blue. I've put candy in her cheek, but she still hasn't fully woken up. Please send an ambulance quickly. Please hurry." She repeated the address twice to make it absolutely clear, her voice choking but still struggling to stay coherent. Then she set the phone down beside her, turning all her attention back to the girl, one hand supporting her head, the other rubbing gently over her ice-cold hand to give her a little warmth, her mouth still talking without pause as if the fragile thread holding the girl here would snap the moment she stopped speaking. Rain kept falling evenly over her shoulders, seeping through the suit jacket that was already soaked and sinking all the way into her skin. But Delia no longer cared about the cold, because in that moment, in the whole universe, only one thing still existed: the faint breathing of a stranger who was now depending entirely on her. And then, after long seconds that seemed to stretch on forever, she felt a change. The girl's lashes fluttered softly, the fingers in Delia's palm curled very slightly, and a faint moan escaped from her throat, the first sign that life was slowly returning. Tears and rain mingled on Delia's cheeks as she let out a small laugh of relief, tangled with a sob. "That's right, you're doing so well, stay here with me. I'm not going anywhere." And at that very rare moment of relief, the phone lying beside her suddenly vibrated and lit up, showing an unfamiliar number that she immediately recognized as the number prefix of the logistics company. And when she hurriedly answered, with a hand still speckled with rainwater, a cold and decisive voice came through the line, informing her that the interview could no longer be postponed, and that the position would be given to another candidate. The cold voice on the other end lasted only a few brief seconds, but to Delia, it was like an icy blade slicing straight into her chest. She opened her mouth, meaning to say something, an explanation, a plea, but her throat locked tight, and before she could force out even one complete sentence, the indifferent beeping tone sounded, signaling that the call had ended. They hadn't even bothered to give her a chance to explain. She sat motionless on the wet, cold sidewalk, the phone still held loosely against her ear, and for one moment the whole world seemed to collapse around her. All those sleepless nights, all the borrowed money, all the hope she had saved and poured into this morning, everything had just vanished in one curt sentence, and the health insurance Toby needed, the future she had dreamed of for her son, had slipped out of her reach forever. But she didn't have time to fall apart, because right then the girl in her arms stirred faintly, her heavy lashes trembling open to reveal eyes still dazed and lost, and a weak whisper escaped her lips. "Where am I? What happened?" Delia immediately swallowed her own pain back down, forcing it to lie still somewhere deep inside her chest. Then she gave the gentlest smile she could manage, though the corners of her eyes were still shining. "You're awake. Thank God. You passed out on the sidewalk. Your blood sugar dropped terribly low, but you're safe now. I'm here. Take it slow, don't rush." The girl blinked at her gaze gradually clearing, then lifted a shaking hand to hold her own head. "I'm sorry, I don't know why. I just felt dizzy, and then everything went black." Delia softly rubbed her back. "It's okay, you don't need to apologize. This isn't your fault. What matters is that you're awake now." She noticed that the girl was still trembling, partly from the danger she had just survived, and partly from the cold that had soaked into her body while she lay on the wet pavement, and without hesitation, Delia tore off the thin jacket she was wearing, even though she herself was drenched and freezing, and draped it over the girl's narrow shoulders. Then she slipped one arm behind the girl's back, supported her elbow with the other, and said, "Lean on me. Don't stand up too fast or you'll get dizzy again. Slow now, just slow." And with every last bit of strength left in her exhausted body, she gently helped the girl move in tiny steps toward the awning of a closed shop a few feet away, where they could get out of the rain, beating down without mercy. She settled the girl with her back against the dry wall, then knelt beside her, brushed the pale blonde strands of wet hair stuck to her forehead back into place, and handed her the last piece of candy. "Suck on this one too, sweetheart, until the ambulance gets here. I already called, they're on their way." The girl obediently took the candy, her hand still weak, then looked up at Delia with an expression difficult to name, a mixture of gratitude, bewilderment, and something almost like disbelief. "You saved me. You were the only one who stopped. I vaguely remember so many people walking past, but only you knelt down." Delia only shook her head softly, her smile sad but warm. "I only did what anyone should have done." And deep inside, she didn't dare tell the girl that the thing anyone should have done had just taken from her everything she had. She glanced toward the end of the street, where the lights of the logistics building still glowed with cold indifference, as if no woman had ever placed her whole life at that doorway, and a quiet ache rose in her. But then she looked back at the stranger's face, now carrying a little color again, watched the steadier rhythm of her breathing, and some part of her whispered that no matter how high the price had been, at least in this very moment, a life was still breathing because of her. Rain continued falling beyond the awning, and two women who had been strangers sat close together in that cramped little shelter, one just pulled back from the edge, the other having just lost her future, and neither of them had any idea that this chance meeting in the rain would become the beginning of things none of them could possibly imagine. In the quiet beneath the awning, When the sound of the rain had become a steady kind of background music and warmth had slowly begun returning to the girl's body, she gently lifted her eyes to Delia and spoke, her voice still trembling but much clearer now. "My name is Posey, and I truly don't know how to thank you enough." Delia smiled and reached out to lightly squeeze the girl's still cool hand, a gentle pressure filled with reassurance. "I'm Delia, and you don't need to thank me that much. As long as you get better, that's enough for me." Posey blinked her still shimmering eyes and looked at the woman kneeling in front of her with a strange intensity, as if she were trying to solve a riddle she couldn't possibly understand. Then she asked, her voice filled with honest confusion, "Miss Delia, I don't understand. When I fell, I could still faintly see things. There were so many people walking past, people dressed nicely, people who looked well off, and yet not one of them stopped. They looked at me and walked around me as if I didn't exist. Only you knelt down on that dirty, wet, freezing ground. Why? Why did you do that when you didn't even know me?" The question hung in the damp air between them, and Delia was silent for a while, her eyes drifting toward the blurred curtain of rain beyond the awning. A shadow of sadness passed across her face like a cloud moving overhead, because that seemingly simple question had touched a very deep place inside her, a place where so many old wounds were kept. At last, she let out a soft breath and turned back to Posey with a sad smile that was deeply gentle. "Because I know what it feels like to be left behind, sweetheart," she said slowly, each word seeming to be drawn from her own flesh and blood. "I've spent many times at the bottom of a pit. I've stood in the middle of a crowded sea of people and felt lonely enough to lose hope. I've reached out for help and found no hand to hold. And I know very well how cold and painful it is to become invisible in the eyes of the whole world, colder than this rain by far." Posey went still as she listened, her eyes wide on Delia, and something in this woman's voice, a bare sincerity with nothing dressed up or polished over, made her feel as if she had just seen a piece of a soul she had never witnessed in the people who usually surrounded her life. "Because I know how much that hurts," Delia went on, her voice catching softly. "I promised myself that if one day I saw someone sinking the way I once sank, then no matter what price I had to pay, I wouldn't step over them. I wouldn't become one of those careless shadows, because sometimes all it takes is one person, just one person willing to stop, to save an entire life." Those words seeped into Posey like water sinking into dry earth, and she lowered her head, her shoulders trembling softly, no longer from the cold, but from a rising emotion she had never known before. She was used to being surrounded by money, by people who bowed and obeyed, by every kind of luxury and comfort, but no one had ever looked at her and spoken words this simple, words that reached all the way to the bottom of her heart. She looked up, her eyes bright with tears. "Miss Delia, I've never met anyone like you. The people around me are good to me because they have to be, because it's their duty, but you had no reason to stop at all. You gained nothing by saving me, and still you did it." Delia gave a soft laugh and reached up to wipe away the tear rolling down the girl's cheek, now touched again with healthy color. "Sweetheart, there are things people do not because they'll gain anything, but simply because it's the right thing to do. And if I received anything from this morning, it's that I got to see you open your eyes and breathe again. For me, that's already more than enough." The two women looked at each other in that moment, and an invisible thread had been woven between them, fragile yet strong. Though neither of them understood it yet, that brief conversation, beneath the awning in the rain, had planted a seed that would one day grow into something that would change both their lives in ways they could never have imagined. As Posey leaned her head against the wall and closed her eyes to rest and gather back a little strength, Delia sat quietly beside her, gazing out into the rain, and in that still moment, her mind unknowingly drifted back to the years she had always tried to bury deep, because what she had just said about the feeling of being abandoned had accidentally stirred everything awake again. She remembered the night more than 4 years ago, the night she carried newborn Toby, only a few days old, back to the small apartment, her heart filled with the fragile, exhausted happiness of a young mother, only to step into a cold, empty room, the closet doors flung wide open with bare hangers swaying on the rod, and on the kitchen table, a note scrawled in a few crooked lines by the husband who had once sworn he would walk through life with her until the end. He wrote that he couldn't handle this burden, that he was still too young to be tied down by a child and a pile of bills, that he was sorry but he had to go find a life of his own. And that was the end of it. Not a proper goodbye. Not one final embrace for the son who hadn't even had the chance to call him daddy. Delia still remembered with painful clarity the feeling of standing frozen in the middle of that room with the sleeping baby in her arms, her legs giving out beneath her until she sat collapsed on the cold floor, unable to cry, unable to speak, only holding Toby tight as if he were the last piece of driftwood in an ocean that was swallowing her whole. And then, when the shock passed, she discovered that the man hadn't only left her with a newborn child. He had also left behind a mountain of debts she had known nothing about, stacked loans from credit cards, from failed business attempts he had kept hidden, all of it now crashing onto the narrow shoulders of a single mother who hadn't even recovered from giving birth. The months that followed were a long chain of sleepless nights. Delia remembered herself curled beneath the weak yellow glow of a desk lamp, while the whole city had sunk into sleep, her hands moving quickly with needle and thread, through piles of clothes she had taken home to mend for money, her eyes blurred from lack of sleep, but still forcing themselves to focus, so every stitch would come out even, because every shirt repaired meant a few more small coins, another carton of milk for her child, another tiny payment toward a debt that seemed as if it would never shrink. She remembered her fingers becoming calloused and bleeding from being pricked by the needle whenever she nodded off. Remembered the deep ache in her back from bending over for hours, and remembered the times Toby woke crying for milk in the middle of the night, when she would set down the needle and thread, quickly wipe her hands, then lift him into her arms and soothe him, nursing him, while softly singing worn-out lullabies, only to quietly return to the scattered fabric beneath the lamp once he had fallen asleep again. And when the nighttime sewing still wasn't enough to fill the holes in her paper-thin wallet, she went to a diner and asked for work as a night kitchen helper. Delia still remembered the thick smell of grease clinging to her hair and skin, remembered the sweltering heat from the pans, remembered her hands soaking in dishwater until they were wrinkled and pale, remembered the veins standing out as she carried heavy stacks of plates again and again until the sky was almost bright. There were nights when she worked until she felt hollowed out, her legs close to buckling, then hurried home in time for dawn to take Toby from the kind elderly neighbor's arms, catching only 1 or 2 short hours of sleep before the machinery of another new day swept her up again. Many times, she had stood before the mirror in the cramped bathroom, staring at her own gaunt face and dark, ringed eyes, barely recognizing the woman reflected there anymore. The girl who had once had simple dreams of a home, a decent job, a peaceful life, now worn down into an exhausted shadow that knew only how to keep surviving day after day for her child. But no matter how weary she became, no matter how much humiliation she swallowed, Delia never once allowed herself to give up, because each time she bent down and looked at Toby's angelic sleeping face, she found a strange strength rising from deep inside her chest, a silent vow that she would never let her child feel what it was like to have the whole world turn its back on him the way she had, even if she had to sacrifice everything. Posey's soft voice pulled Delia out of her memories. "What are you thinking about? You look so far away." And Delia startled slightly as she turned back, forcing a strained smile to hide the bitterness that had just risen inside her. "It's nothing, sweetheart. I was just remembering a few old things." But Posey, with the sensitivity of someone who had just been saved and was looking at her rescuer through entirely different eyes, wouldn't let her slip away that easily. "I don't believe you. I can see something so heavy in your eyes. You've been through a lot, haven't you? Can you tell me? I want to understand the person who saved me." Delia hesitated for a moment, but there was something in the girl's sincerity that softened the defensive walls she had always built around herself, and she let out a quiet sigh. "My husband left when my son had just been born. He left me with a baby and a pile of debt. Since then, I've carried everything alone, working every kind of job I could find to raise my child." Posey listened, her lips pressed tightly together, her eyes filling with anger and sorrow. How could anyone be that cruel, leaving his wife and child behind when they needed him most? Delia only shook her head softly. "That was a long time ago, sweetheart. I don't hate him anymore. Hatred only makes you more tired. I just focus on taking care of Toby, my son. He's all I have." Then her voice lowered, carrying a newer pain, one that still sat closer to the surface. "And last year my mother died. She got terribly sick. I did everything I could, borrowed money from every place I could to pay her hospital bills. But in the end, I still couldn't keep her here. Even now, I'm still paying that medical debt little by little. It's like a chain wrapped around me, tightening and never letting go. Posey fell silent, and only after a while did she ask hesitantly, "So this morning, that interview you mentioned on the phone, it was very important to you, wasn't it?" Delia said nothing, and that silence said everything before she gave a small nod. "It was a warehouse manager position with health insurance. You know, Toby gets sick often, and every time I take him to a doctor, I have to scramble for money. That job was the last chance for my son to have proper medical care. I'd been preparing for it for months." As those words sank into Posey's mind, her face turned pale, and her eyes widened in horror as she put the pieces together. "So you missed that interview because you stopped to save me. You lost your last chance for your son just to save a stranger like me. Oh, Miss Delia, what have I done? I've made you lose everything." Posey burst into tears, covering her face with both hands, her narrow shoulders trembling inside the jacket Delia had given her, and Delia quickly drew her into her arms, comforting her as she would a child. "Don't, sweetheart, don't blame yourself. Listen to me. If I had to choose again, I'd do exactly the same thing. I can look for another job, but a human life can't be replaced. Do you understand? You still have a whole life ahead of you." But those comforting words only made Posey sob harder, and then, between broken breaths, she said something that made Delia freeze. "You know, I always thought I was the unfortunate one. I live surrounded by luxury. I've never had to worry about money for a single day. But I'm so lonely, Miss Delia. I'm protected until I can hardly breathe. I don't have one real friend. No one looks at me as a person. They only look at me as something that has to be guarded. And today was the first time in so many years that I was free to step outside alone, to breathe the air without someone hovering beside me. But then I collapsed, and the only person who reached out to me was a stranger willing to sacrifice her own future." Delia listened, her heart tightening. She held the girl's thin shoulders more firmly, and in that moment she suddenly understood that loneliness made no distinction between rich and poor, that behind this girl's shell of wealth was a soul longing to be seen, just like hers, and two women from worlds that seemed separated by an abyss were now leaning on each other beneath a small awning, connected by the very wounds life had carved into each of them. When Posey's sobs gradually quieted, she still rested her head against Delia's shoulder, and as though a door inside her had been opened and no longer wanted to close, she began to speak, her voice soft but heavy with things that had been held in for far too long. "You know, all of this morning was the first time in many years that I got to walk outside by myself. I had planned it for weeks. I only wanted to be a normal person, even for just a few hours, to walk along the street without anyone following behind me, to stop by a small coffee shop and order a drink like everyone else, to look at the city with my own eyes instead of through the window of an expensive car." Delia tilted her head slightly and listened, a flicker of concern moving through her heart, because the way Posey spoke about being followed, about having to plan carefully just to go out alone, sounded like something unusual for a young girl. But she didn't interrupt. She only quietly stroked Posey's pale blonde hair so the girl could keep pouring her heart out. "My family," Posey continued, her voice mixed with a sadness that was hard to name. "They protect me so carefully it feels suffocating. There's always someone watching me, driving me everywhere, taking me wherever I go. I have to report every place I'm going, and anyone I meet is watched. They say it's because they love me, because they want to keep me safe. Sometimes I feel like a bird locked inside a golden cage, fed well, cared for properly, but never once truly allowed to spread its wings and fly. I'm so tired of it, Miss Delia. So this morning I secretly ran away. I turned off the location, tracking on my phone, slipped out through the back door, and I only wanted one day to live like everyone else. Who would thought my body would betray me, right in the middle of the moment, when I had just tasted a little freedom?" Delia gently asked, "So you have an illness, sweetheart?" And Posey nodded, lifting her sleeve to reveal a small compact device attached close to her arm, the very device Delia had seen when searching through her bag. "I've had diabetes since I was little. I always have to keep this blood sugar monitor with me. It tells me when my numbers drop too low. I should paid closer attention to it, but this morning I was so caught up in enjoying the feeling of being free that I forgot I needed to eat something. I was too careless, and then everything happened the way you saw." Posey looked at the device with a sad smile. "I hate always having to depend on it. I hate feeling like my own body could collapse at any moment. But I don't have another choice. I've had to live with it my whole life." What neither Posey nor Delia knew in that peaceful moment was that the small device, which seemed only meant to measure numbers, also held a secret even its owner knew nothing about. Because the older brother, who was always worried about her, had quietly had a special feature installed inside it, a signal that would automatically send out her exact location to a team always on standby whenever Posey's blood sugar dropped to a dangerous level. And at that very moment, while the two women were still sitting under the awning, talking, as if no one else was paying attention, somewhere in the city, that alarm had silently gone off, and a machine neither of them could possibly imagine had begun moving straight toward them. Delia still knew nothing about it. She only sensed vaguely that there was something about this girl that didn't entirely match her appearance, the way she spoke about being watched, about people guarding her, about a family that protected her to an extreme degree. All of it stirred in Delia a feeling she couldn't name, but she decided not to ask any deeper, because she believed everyone had hidden corners they weren't ready to share yet, and the only thing she cared about right now was that the girl in front of her was safe. So she only smiled, gave Posey's hand a gentle squeeze, and said, "No matter how suffocating your family makes you feel, the fact that they worry about you that much also means you're very deeply loved, sweetheart. Not everyone is lucky enough to have that." Delia's comforting words hadn't even had time to settle before another sound tore through the peaceful air beneath the awning. The roar of several engines arriving at once, and within seconds, 3 gleaming black cars pulled up and braked hard right in front of the sidewalk, rainwater spraying up in white sheets beneath their tires. Delia hadn't had time to understand what was happening before the doors of the cars flew open all at once, and several tall men in dark suits soaked by the rain stepped out, their movements swift and decisive, their cold, sharp eyes sweeping over the surroundings with a vigilance that sent a chill through the air. Each of them wore a small earpiece tucked against the rim of one ear, and they exchanged short, clipped words through their communication devices. By instinct, Delia tightened her arms around Posey and pulled her closer, her heart pounding because she didn't understand who these threatening men were, or what they had come here to do. But then she realized at once that they hadn't come for her, because every one of their eyes was fixed on the girl sitting beside her with unmistakable urgency mixed with relief. The man in front, a broad-shouldered man with a stern face, immediately dropped to one knee before Posey, his voice both respectful and tense, almost trembling as he spoke. "Miss, thank God you're still here. Are you all right? We received the emergency signal and searched everywhere. You scared us half to death. Are you hurt anywhere?" The way he called Posey Miss, the way that entire group of powerful men bowed themselves before a 19-year-old girl with a mixture of reverence and fear, as if they had just escaped some terrible disaster, made Delia freeze, and the vague pieces in her mind began to reveal a truth she had not dared believe, that the girl she had just saved on the sidewalk was not ordinary at all. Posey nodded weakly to reassure the people surrounding her. "I'm fine. My blood sugar just dropped, but thanks to her," and she turned as if to introduce Delia, but the men didn't give her even another second. They immediately gathered around to help her stand, one man taking off his coat and draping it over her shoulders, another quickly speaking through his earpiece and ordering a car prepared to take her straight to the best hospital. Everything happened in a frantic rush, as if every passing second were priceless. Amid that chaos, Delia quietly took one step back, then another. She felt out of place and very small inside this strange world of power that had suddenly descended around her, and some instinct told her that this was not where she belonged, that she had no place in this scene. So she gently lifted the collar of her soaked coat, hugged her old worn bag against her chest, and began walking away into the rain, silently withdrawing from the world she had accidentally touched. She didn't linger to be thanked, didn't wait for any question or concern, and none of those people had time to ask who she was or where she had come from, because all their attention was poured into getting their girl to safety. And Delia expected nothing for herself anyway. All that remained inside her now was a tired emptiness and the harsh reality that even though she had saved a life, she still had to return to the wreckage of her own, to the unpaid debt, to the child waiting for her, to the job that had slipped away forever. But when she had taken only a few steps away from the awning, merging into the crowd in the curtain of rain, a weak voice rose behind her, trying with all its strength to climb above the sound of the downpour. It was Posey, struggling to pull free from the ring of escorts around her, her frightened eyes searching for the woman who had saved her, calling after her with every bit of strength she had left. Miss Delia, don't go, please don't go. I haven't even thanked you yet. I don't even know how to find you again." But that desperate call was swallowed by the rain and drowned beneath the engines, and Delia, either because she couldn't hear it through the heavy downpour, or because she thought it was better to leave quietly, never looked back. She simply disappeared little by little behind the moving figures, carrying with her a secret even she didn't know, that she had just saved the person an entire powerful empire in the shadows cherished more than their own lives. The bus carrying Delia back to the poor boarding district on the edge of the city jolted over one rain-soaked street after another, and she sat curled up in the last row, with her clothes still drenched and clinging tightly to her body, her empty eyes staring through the fogged window without truly seeing anything at all. When she stepped down at the familiar stop and dragged herself along the muddy road leading into the old row of rented rooms, the phone in her coat pocket vibrated softly once, and with a dark premonition, she pulled it out. The screen showed a new email from the logistics company, the cold subject line striking her eyes, "Recruitment result notification." She froze in the middle of the road, her trembling finger opening the email, and the emotionless words appeared before her, like hammer blows landing straight on her heart. They thanked her for her interest in the position. They regretted to inform her that, because she had not appeared for the scheduled interview, they had been forced to offer the opportunity to another candidate. They wished her luck in the future, and that was the end of it. Only a few dry lines had officially slammed shut the door into which she had poured all her hope, even though deep down she had known this would come from the phone call that morning. Seeing it written clearly in black and white like a final sentence still made Delia feel as if her legs were giving out beneath her. Her throat tightened with bitterness, and she had to draw in a deep breath before she had enough strength to keep walking toward her rented room. But fate did not seem ready to release her that day, because the moment she reached the head of the damp hallway, she ran into the landlord, a middle-aged man with a hard and sour face. He stopped her right in the passageway, his tone not even bothering to hide his impatience. "Miss Frost, how many times have I reminded you about this month's rent? You're nearly 2 weeks late. I'm running a business too, not a charity. If you still can't come up with the money by this weekend, I'm afraid I'll have to start considering renting the room to someone else. You understand what I mean, don't you?" Delia could only lower her head and stammer, asking him to give her a little more time, promising that she would try to figure something out, even though she herself had no idea where she would find that money, now that the job that was supposed to save her had just dissolved into nothing. The landlord only gave a grunt and walked away, leaving her standing rooted in the hallway, with another layer of weight added to shoulders that were already bowed. She dragged her heavy steps to the door of the elderly neighbor who had watched Toby for her since early morning, and when the door opened, the kind old woman's face carried a worried look that immediately tightened Delia's heart. The woman took her hand, her voice filled with concern. "Delia, Toby hasn't seemed well since noon. His forehead feels a little warm. I wiped him down and coaxed him to sleep, but I think you should check on him carefully. Poor little boy kept asking for his mama all afternoon." Hearing that, Delia had no room left to think. She hurriedly thanked the old woman and almost ran inside, and there, on the small bed set against the corner of the room, her 4-year-old son was lying curled up in sleep, his cheeks flushed unnaturally red and tiny beads of sweat dotting his small forehead. She knelt beside his bed, pressed her palm to Toby's forehead, and felt the warm heat rising beneath his skin. Her heart seemed to be squeezed shut. Her son had a fever, and inside her mind came the bare and merciless truth at once, that there was almost nothing left in the medicine cabinet, that in her wallet there were only a few small bills and coins, that the job with health insurance that could have helped her take her son to a proper doctor had just slipped from her hands beyond recovery. She sat there beside her son's bed, her body still wet and cold from the rain, her heart tangled with 100 worries, 3 pieces of bad news crashing down on her in less than 1 hour as if trying to drown her completely: the lost job, the threat of losing her place to live, and her child falling sick, each burden piled on top of the next. forming a massive wall that seemed impossible for any human strength to climb, and Delia could only grip her son's small burning hand tightly and clench her teeth, trying to keep the tears waiting at the corners of her eyes from falling. Night slowly fell, covering the small rented room in a lonely darkness, with only the weak glow of the nightlight spilling over the stained walls, and Delia still sat there beside her son's bed, every now and then dipping the cloth into the basin of cool water and gently wiping Toby's forehead, his neck, and his tiny hands, trying to bring down the fever that was still smoldering inside his body. She had searched through the old medicine cabinet and found only a few fever-reducing pills left. Enough to get through tonight, but certainly not enough if the fever lasted. And when she opened her thin wallet and counted again and again, the few small bills and coins inside weren't enough to buy even one strip of medicine, let alone take her son to see a doctor. She sat silently, looking at her little boy's fever-flushed face, listening to each soft breath that came a little too heavily from him. And in that stillness of the night, when no one was watching, when she no longer had to force herself to look strong in front of anyone, the shell of resilience she had worn around herself for so many years finally cracked. For the first time in a very long while, Delia allowed herself to cry. The tears rolled down her hollow cheeks, quiet and salty, and she pressed a hand tightly over her mouth so the sobs wouldn't break free and wake her child. Her shoulders trembled in the dark, and all the exhaustion, humiliation, and fear she had held down through that long and terrible day now burst open beyond her control. She cried for the job she had lost, cried for the small roof over their heads that was about to slip from her hands, cried for her sick child when she was helpless to care for him properly, cried for her own life that kept struggling at the bottom of a pit with no way out in sight, and in that weakest moment, a bitter question kept rising in her mind. What if this morning she had simply stepped over that girl? What if she had been selfish just once and run straight to the interview? Maybe things would be different now. Maybe her son could have been taken to a proper doctor. But just as that thought began to kindle, Delia bent down and looked closely at Toby's sleeping face, at his long curved lashes trembling faintly, at the innocent little softness of his lips even in his tired sleep, and something inside her quietly softened, because she suddenly imagined the scene another way. She imagined that if this morning she had stepped over that dying girl to chase her own chance, then perhaps she would be sitting here now with a job in her hands, but carrying a stain on her conscience that could never be washed clean. She would have to live with the thought that she had turned her back and left a person to die right before her eyes. And she wondered, when Toby grew up, what would she teach him? How would she look into his clear eyes and teach him to love, to be kind, to reach out to people who had stumbled and fallen, if she herself had been the first to trample those values because life was hard? No, she shook her head softly in the dark, wiping away the tears still clinging to her cheeks, and a quiet firmness rose to take the place of the despair from moments before. She realized that no matter how high the price had been, if time turned back and she stood before that choice all over again, she would still kneel beside the strange girl on that wet, freezing sidewalk. She would still choose to save a human life, because kindness wasn't something meant to be handed out only when life was abundant. It was in the most desperate moments that it truly revealed who a person was. She bent down and placed a very gentle kiss on her son's warm forehead, whispering through her tears, "I'm sorry I can't take better care of you yet, but I promise I'll never stop trying, and I don't regret teaching you through the way I live." Then she carefully pulled the thin blanket back over him, sat with her back against the side of the bed, and in that moment of deepest hardship, Delia had no idea that the darkest hour always came just before dawn broke, and that fate was quietly preparing to knock on the door of her life in a way she could never have imagined. It was very late at night now, and the whole poor boarding district had sunk into silence, with only the steady chirping of insects and the occasional drip of rainwater falling from leaking awnings. Toby had fallen into a deep sleep after his fever eased thanks to the last pill, his breathing steadier now, and Delia was just about to lie down and close her eyes for a little while, after a long and exhausting day, when suddenly she heard an unfamiliar sound breaking the quiet of the night, the low, heavy hum of luxury cars moving into the narrow alley that, all year round, knew only the sounds of old motorbikes and rusted bicycles. She frowned slightly, stepped to the small window, and pulled the faded cloth curtain aside just enough to look down, and what struck her eyes made her heart tighten. 3 glossy black cars, exactly like the ones she had seen on the sidewalk that morning, were stopping one after another, right in front of the shabby row of rented rooms, their headlights sweeping cold streaks of light across the damp, mold-stained walls, creating a strangely jarring scene between power and luxury on one side, and the worn-out poverty of this place on the other. A few windows in the neighboring rooms stirred softly, several curious neighbors pulling back their curtains to peek out before quickly ducking back inside and closing their doors tight, because everyone could feel the unusual and threatening air spreading over their normally quiet boarding house, and no one dared get involved with these mysterious strangers appearing at such a late hour. Delia held her breath and watched, and she saw the door of the middle car slowly open. Then a man stepped out, and the mere way he appeared carried a kind of authority that made her shiver. He was a tall man, powerfully built beneath a dark suit cut with exquisite precision across his broad shoulders. He moved with a calm, slow, calculated composure, every step firm, as if the whole world itself had to make way for him. And under the weak yellow light spilling from the boarding house's only street lamp, Delia caught a glimpse of a faint scar running along his sharp jawline, a mark that spoke of a past that had never been peaceful. But what haunted her most were the man's eyes. Even from this distance and in that dim half-light, she could feel the chill radiating from those green eyes, sharp and deep as the surface of a frozen winter lake. The eyes of a man far too used to giving orders and being obeyed. Eyes that made the person facing him feel as if every secret they carried had already been seen through. The man stopped for a moment, lifted his gaze toward the old row of rented rooms with an unreadable expression, then said something to the attendants standing respectfully around him, and at once one of them stepped forward and pointed toward Delia's room, making her heart nearly stop when she realized they had come here for her. She hurriedly let the curtain fall, backed into the room, her heart pounding hard in her chest, and by instinct, her eyes went to the bed where Toby was sleeping deeply, while the primal fear of a mother, wanting to protect her child at any cost, rose inside her. She didn't know who these people were, didn't know why they had come looking for her in the middle of the night, and a series of frightening possibilities flashed through her mind. She gently pulled the blanket higher over her son and tucked it carefully around him, then tiptoed softly toward the door so she wouldn't wake him, determined that whatever happened, she would face it alone out there, and absolutely would not let anything touch Toby's peaceful sleep. And then at the very moment she placed her hand on the doorknob, trembling and uncertain whether she should open it, 3 slow knocks sounded from the other side of the thin wooden door, firm, deliberate, and full of authority, followed by a man's low voice, a voice so calm it was chilling, yet calling her exact name with unmistakable clarity and not the slightest hesitation. "Miss Delia Frost, I know you're in there. Please open the door. I didn't come here to hurt you." Delia stood frozen behind the door for a long while, her hand trembling on the knob, her breathing quick and uneven while her mind spun with hundreds of questions. How did this strange man know her name? How had he found his way here in the middle of the night? But then that low voice spoke again with a strange patience. "I know you're afraid, and you have every right to be cautious, but I give you my word of honor that I've come here with good intentions. I only want to speak with you for a few minutes." And the calmness in that voice, carrying no trace of threat, finally made Delia draw in a deep breath and slowly open the door just a narrow crack. The man stood there beneath the dim hallway light, tall and imposing, and when his cold green eyes met hers, Delia felt a chill run down her spine. But he did not step inside. He only remained still at the threshold with a certain measure of respect, then gave a slight bow of his head. "Miss Frost, my name is Roan Vaziri, and I came here to thank you for what you did this morning." The name Vaziri was spoken calmly, yet Delia noticed the way the attendants behind him bowed their heads slightly when they heard it, and some vague instinct warned her that this was a name carrying a weight she shouldn't take lightly. "The girl you saved," Roan continued, his voice lowering, and for the first time something faint seemed to shake that steel coldness in him. "Her name is Posey, and she's my younger sister, the only family I have left in this world, the most precious thing I have." Delia's lips parted slightly in surprise, so the sweet, fragile girl she had sat talking with beneath the awning was the younger sister of this frighteningly powerful man standing before her now. "You must be wondering how I found you," Roan said, as if he had read the questions in her eyes. This morning, when my people took Posey for emergency care, she kept talking about a kind woman who knelt down and saved her in the rain. A woman who had only had time to tell her that her name was Delia before quietly leaving, without waiting for even a word of thanks. She was tormented because she had let you disappear. I couldn't bear the thought that the person who saved my sister's life could vanish without being repaid. He went on, so I had my people pull footage from the surveillance cameras on that street, follow every frame until they found you, and from there trace who you were and where you lived. And the moment I had this address, I came here myself in the middle of the night. He paused for a moment, then added in a tone that made Delia pay close attention. I want you to understand that this is personal to me. I didn't hand this matter to anyone beneath me, because the debt of gratitude my family owes you is too great to let someone else speak on my behalf. A human life, especially Posey's life, is something no one can measure. As Rowan spoke, Delia watched his face closely, and although the outer shell of this man was cold and hard as an impenetrable wall of steel, she still recognized something hidden deep inside those green eyes. Something she knew far too well, because she had carried it herself. The lingering echo of absolute terror in a person who had almost lost the most precious things in his life. The gaze of someone who had stood at the edge of loss and had only just been pulled back. And in the very moment she saw that deeply human fear flickering behind his icy authority, Delia suddenly realized that whoever the man before her might be, whatever frightening world he might belong to, before anything else, he was still an older brother aching with worry for his younger sister. And that fear was exactly like the fear she carried in her own heart for the feverish little boy sleeping behind her. Although Delia had caught a glimpse of the deeply human fear hidden behind Roan's cold eyes, she still did not allow herself to lower her guard, because the instinct of a single mother who had grown too used to protecting herself in a world full of danger would not let her trust anyone easily, especially not a man who appeared in the middle of the night with a convoy of black cars and frightening attendants behind him. She stood blocking the narrow opening of the door, one hand still gripping it tightly, as if ready to slam it shut at any moment, and looked straight into Roan's eyes, her voice trembling yet trying hard to remain firm. Mr. Vasari, I appreciate you coming all the way here, and I'm glad your sister is safe, but I need you to tell me the truth. What kind of man are you? Men like you don't come to a place like this at this hour bringing anything ordinary, and I have a little boy sleeping inside. Those words slipped out with all the fear pressing heavily on her heart, and Delia lowered her voice, though every word became more determined than ever. I don't care how rich or powerful you are. I only have one thing in this world to lose, and that's my boy. So I'm asking you, whatever purpose brought you here, please don't let anything from your world touch my son. I don't have much left to lose, but I'll do everything to protect him. When those words sounded, a heavy silence covered the cramped space at the threshold. Rowan did not answer right away. He only looked quietly at the small woman standing guard before the door of her room, trembling and fierce like a mother animal, ready to risk her life to protect her young. And in that moment, something shifted faintly in his green eyes, which were usually cold as ice. He was far too used to people being afraid of him, used to the name Vasari, making others bow their heads and shrink back. But the fear this woman was showing was different. It wasn't fear for herself, but fear for her child, a pure and powerful protectiveness that made even him, a man hardened by countless schemes and betrayals, soften slightly. At last Rowan spoke, his voice low and slow, carrying a sincerity he himself rarely allowed anyone to see. Miss Frost, I won't insult your intelligence by lying to you. You guessed correctly. I'm not an ordinary man. The world I belong to isn't a peaceful place, and I don't blame you for being cautious. On the contrary, I respect you for it. He paused, his eyes drifting past the narrow opening of the door, where the outline of the small bed and the sleeping child could faintly be seen. Then he turned back and looked directly into Delia's eyes. And because I understand exactly how dangerous my world is, I promise you one thing, and my promise is something I've never broken to anyone. Nothing, never, absolutely nothing belonging to that world of mine will ever be allowed to touch you or your son, not even a single hair. I'll make sure the two of you are always completely safe. That is the very least I can do for the woman who saved my sister's life. Delia looked into his eyes as he made that promise, and although reason still warned her to be wary, Some part deep inside her could feel the weight and honesty in each word, because she recognized that this man, no matter how cold and frightening he was not speaking to her with the tone of a powerful man bestowing a favor, but with the respect of one human being toward another. And for the first time since that convoy of black cars had appeared, the tension in her shoulders eased slightly, though she still did not dare trust him completely. But at least she was willing to listen to what this strange man wanted to say next. Sensing that Delia's caution had softened somewhat, Roan gave a slight gesture with his hand, and one attendant immediately stepped forward and handed him a black leather briefcase. He took it, then gently opened it right in front of her, revealing thick stacks of money arranged so neatly that Delia had to hold her breath, an amount larger than everything she had ever seen in her entire life combined. "Miss Frost," Roan said in the calm voice of a man used to solving every matter with numbers, "I know your situation isn't easy. My people have told me about the debt you're carrying, about the job you just lost, about this rented room, and I want you to take this money. Think of it as repayment for what you did. It will help you clear your debts, take care of your son, and start over with a better life. You deserve to receive it." But contrary to what he expected, Delia's face did not light up with joy. Instead, a flicker of hurt passed through her eyes, and then she shook her head, stepped back, and said in a voice that was soft yet strangely firm, "Thank you, but I can't accept this money." Roan paused, his brows drawing together slightly as if he had just heard something absurd. "You're refusing it, why? You just told me you're drowning in debt, that your son is sick and you have no money for treatment. This money could solve all those problems for you in a single moment, so why would you refuse it?" Delia lifted her head, her gray eyes shining with a light Roan had never seen in anyone who had ever stood before his money. "Mr. Vaziri, it's true that I need money badly, so badly it feels desperate. But if I accept this money, then what would my act this morning become? It wouldn't be that I saved a human being anymore. It would become a transaction, a deal, and I would become someone who sold my own kindness in exchange for money. I didn't kneel down on that cold, wet sidewalk because I saw your sister as a chance to earn money." He went still as she continued, her voice trembling with emotion. "I knelt down because I saw a person who needed help, and if I take your money now, I'll never again be able to look my son in the eyes and teach him that kindness is something we give without expecting repayment, because I myself will have accepted a price for it." Those words struck Roan like an invisible blow and left him silent. He stood there staring at her, and then, as though he needed a quiet moment to absorb what he had just heard, he slowly closed the leather briefcase and walked a few steps to the small window of the room, standing there as he looked out into the night, where his black cars waited motionless beneath the streetlight. "All my life," he said softly, his voice low and distant, as if he were speaking to himself more than to her, "I've lived in a world where everything has a price, where loyalty can be bought, silence can be bought, even a human life can be measured in numbers. I became so used to throwing money at problems to make them disappear that I almost forgot there are still things in this world that can't be bought or sold." He turned back to look at Delia, and this time, in those cold green eyes, there was real respect. "Do you know, there are countless people willing to do the worst things for only a small part of the money in this briefcase, and yet you, a woman standing at the edge of hardship, can still lift your head and refuse it just to protect your dignity. And that, Miss Frost, is why I respect you more than anyone I've ever met in my life." A long silence followed those words of respect, and Roan stood there in thought beside the window, as though weighing something in his mind. His manner had changed. No longer did he carry the cold authority of a man who had come to bestow a favor. Instead, there was the quiet reflection of someone who had just realized he had approached the matter the wrong way from the very beginning. Then he turned back, and when he spoke, his voice had softened a great deal, carrying a kind of care, as if this time he was truly choosing each word. "Miss Frost, I'm sorry. I was wrong to offer you money. I behaved in the only way I knew how and unintentionally insulted the most precious thing in you. But now I understand that a woman like you doesn't need charity. What you need is a chance, a real chance to stand on your own 2 feet." He stepped a little closer, though he still kept a respectful distance. "Outside the world you're afraid of, my family also owns many lawful and decent businesses. Among them is a chain of laundromats operating throughout the city, a completely transparent and clean business. And we need a manager with heart, someone trustworthy. Someone who knows the value of every dollar earned through sweat and hardship and knows how to treat employees with kindness. I don't think anyone is more suited to that position than you. Delia blinked in astonishment. She hadn't yet fully understood the meaning of his offer when Roan went on. It would be a real job, with a salary worthy of your ability, along with full health insurance, for both you and your son, so the boy can receive medical care whenever he needs it, and you won't have to stay awake all night worrying about money anymore. I'll also help you find a better place to live than this, somewhere safe and warm where Toby can grow up. Hearing that, though Delia's heart stirred faintly at the bright future she had never dared dream of, the fear inside her had not disappeared, and she hesitantly asked, "But sir, that job, does it have anything to do with that other world of yours? I can't. I could never let my son be involved even slightly in anything shady. I'd rather stay poor than trade away my integrity." Roan looked at her, and this time something almost like sympathy appeared on his hard face. He nodded slowly. "I understand your concern, and I respect it, so I promise you once again that your part of the work will remain entirely clean and transparent. You'll do only the proper management work of a legitimate business. You'll never have to see, hear, or touch anything belonging to the world you fear. I'll draw that boundary myself and make sure it's never crossed." He paused, then added in a rarely warm, low voice, "You taught me something tonight, that there are things in this world more precious than money. And I want to answer that lesson, not by buying you, but by giving you exactly what you deserve, the chance to build a decent future with your own hands and your own ability, not through anyone's pity." Delia stood silently before that offer, her heart tangled with 100 thoughts. On one side were the fear and caution that still remained. On the other was a fragile thread of hope for a different life for her son. And while she was still wavering, not knowing how to answer, from inside the room behind her came the faint sound of Toby shifting in his sleep, and the soft rustle of the blanket, a tiny sound, but enough to pull Delia back to reality, reminding her that whatever decision she was about to make would not decide only her own fate, but also the entire future of the small sleeping life behind her. The faint sound of her son stirring was like an invisible thread, pulling Delia back to the most important thing in her life. She glanced softly toward the small bed where Toby was still sleeping peacefully, after only shifting a little before sinking back into sleep, and in the moment she looked at that angelic face of her son, all the hesitation inside her seemed to be illuminated by a new kind of light. She thought about the long nights in because her child was sick, and she had no money. Thought about the medical debt like a chain tightening around her life. Thought about the shabby rented room that had become a luxury she could barely afford to keep. And then she thought about the chance being offered before her eyes. Not a handout of money she would take and spend until it was gone, but a real job where she could use her own hands and mind to build a decent life for her son. She understood that refusing this opportunity out of blind pride would be selfish toward Toby, but accepting it without thinking could place her child in danger. And so when she finally lifted her head and looked straight into Roan's green eyes, she knew what she had to do. "Mr. Vaziri," she said, her voice steady again, "I'll accept your job offer, but I need you to agree to my conditions, and these conditions are not negotiable." Roan raised his eyebrows slightly, a flicker of interest and respect appearing in his eyes at the strength of the woman who had been trembling behind the door only moments earlier. He nodded. "I'm listening. Say what you need to say." Delia drew in a deep breath. "First, I'll work by my own real ability. I want to be assigned work and judged like any other manager. I'll accept the salary worthy of the effort I put in, not a single dollar more because of gratitude or pity. I want to earn my living through my own sweat, not live on a debt of kindness." Roan nodded, his lips curving faintly into the briefest trace of a smile. "That is exactly what I expected from you. What else?" "And second," Delia continued, her voice sharpening with all the fierceness of a mother, "this is the most important condition. I require that your family, for any reason at all, will never be allowed to contact, approach, or pull my son into anything. Toby must grow up as a normal child, completely separate from everything belonging to your world. He will never know about it, and even more, he will never be involved in it. That is the boundary I'll protect with my life." Roan looked at her in silence for a long while, then slowly held out his hand. "Miss Frost, I accept all your conditions, and I give you the honor of the Vaziri family as my pledge, that the boy will remain outside my world forever." This is a promise I'll remember in my bones." Delia looked at the hand extended toward her, and after one final moment of hesitation, she placed her small calloused hand into it. The handshake between two people from two separate worlds sealed an agreement that both of them understood would change their lives forever. Just then, hurried footsteps sounded from the stairway, and before Delia could react, a familiar small figure rushed forward and threw her arms around her. It was Posey, her face soaked with tears yet shining with joy. "Miss Delia, I begged him to let me come along. I was afraid I'd never find you again. I'm sorry I let you leave this morning. And thank you. Thank you for everything." Delia embraced the delicate girl who had accidentally stepped into her life and turned it in an entirely new direction, feeling the warmth and sincerity radiating from that hug, and for the first time after a long, endless day in which she had thought she had lost everything, she smiled softly, a real smile rising from the bottom of her heart, because she was beginning to believe that perhaps her kindness had not been forgotten after all. 4 months had passed since that fateful rainy night, and Delia Frost's life had changed in ways she had never dared dream of during her darkest days. Now, every morning, she no longer woke with the constant fear of rent money or piled-up bills pressing on her chest, but in a small, clean, warm apartment where sunlight could pour through the window each morning. She had become the manager of a spacious laundromat that belonged to the Vasari family's legal chain of businesses, and exactly as Roan had promised, her work was completely transparent and clean. She worked hard with all her ability, learned how to run the place, treated every employee under her with kindness, and before long the laundromat she managed had become one of the most beloved places among customers because of the care and devotion she poured into it. With a salary she truly deserved and earned through her own sweat, she gradually began paying down the medical debt that had weighed on her shoulders for so long, and for the first time in many years, she could lift her head and say that she was standing firmly on her own 2 feet, not living on anyone's pity. But what filled her heart with the greatest happiness was Toby, her little boy, who was now healthy and rosy-cheeked, no longer suffering through endless fevers that kept his mother awake with worry, because now he had full health insurance, and every morning she got to hold his tiny hand and walk him to kindergarten, watching him run and play happily with his friends, his clear laughter ringing out like the most beautiful sound life had ever given her. Posey, the little sister she had saved on the sidewalk that year, had now become a close friend to her. She often visited the laundromat or the small apartment where mother and son lived, bringing laughter and warmth with her. She adored Toby like a true aunt, and that friendship healed the loneliness inside both women, who had each been wounded in her own quiet way. As for Roan, that powerful and cold man still kept his promise. He always maintained a respectful distance and had never once allowed his dark world to touch the peaceful life of Delia and her son. But anyone observant enough could notice a very small change in that hardened man. His eyes, when he watched his sister laughing and playing beside Delia and Toby, carried less ice than before, and sometimes people caught him standing quietly from afar, watching the small home that kindness had created with a rare hint of gentleness, as if he too were being healed by the light of decency he had once forgotten. It was a small change, but one full of hope, left open for tomorrow. Delia's story reminds us of something simple yet profound, that sincere kindness is never meaningless, that when we choose to stop and help another human being, even when it costs us something precious, we aren't truly losing. In fact, we are planting a seed of goodness. And sometimes that seed takes root in the darkest place and returns to us in the most miraculous ways. Because the value of a person doesn't lie in whether they are rich or poor, strong or weak, but in how they choose to treat their fellow human beings in the moments when no one is watching. Kindness does not ask who we are helping, and true compassion is a light that can warm even the coldest hearts, teaching us that every person, no matter what circumstances they are in, deserves respect and love. And what about you? If you were in that situation, would you have stopped? And how did this story touch your heart? Please leave a comment and share the deepest feelings from your heart so we can listen, because every line of your thoughts is incredibly precious to us. If this story has brought you some emotion and meaning, please don't forget to press the like button, share the video with the people you love, and subscribe to our channel so that every day you can hear more touching and meaningful stories. May all of you listening to this story always have abundant health, a joyful life, peace and happiness each day. Goodbye for now, and see you again in the next videos.